Welcome everyone. This is episode 28 of the Transmaxxing podcast, and today's topic is a response to the accusation of us being like trans in denial, because this is something a lot of people like to claim. But the problem here is that what does trans even mean in the first place? The notion of being trans in denial is very popular on various trans spaces, and people often talk about questioning, coming out. People often share memes where they might be transgender in denial themselves. And often I see people say that about transmaxxing, that transmaxxers will be trans in denial. The obvious issue here is that what does even trans mean in the first place? Trans, as it's used today, is an umbrella term. They can refer to self-identification, gender dysphoria, pursuing medical transition, pursuing social transition, having a female brain when you're born male or the reverse of that, or being born in the wrong body, being like a girl trapped in a male body. There are all those different trans notions out there. Often when people say that someone is trans in denial, they don't even clarify what that even means. It's some amorphous, undefined, unclear concept. It's a very vague concept where the reader of the meme or whatever can infer their own interpretation of it without having to argue or see another definition presented. So this is why people often say that without clarifying, because they don't want to cause trouble or infighting in the trans community, so they just keep it undefined, unclear, and as a meme. But this is not the right path forward. We have to be serious about these topics to really advance humanity forward when it comes to transgender topics. So, what do you say, Val? Do you think you're trans in denial?
Well, I think I'm going through the means of being trans, but I can understand, like, not feeling like you identify with all the other trans people out there because they just, like, behave so differently. But I mean, I am clearly trans because I'm taking hormones to transition to become a woman.
Yeah,
It's
obviously.
I think the weirdest part about all this is how, like, it's suggested to, like, even, like, say certain things to so then the doctor knows you have gender dysphoria, even though it should be very clear that you do, you know? Or whatever.
Yeah, all this gatekeeping going on is a bit problematic. But I also dislike this focus on like innate characteristics. Let's start by covering gender dysphoria. Is it possible to have gender dysphoria without realizing prior to transitioning?
Yes, I think that can be true as well. I think one of the biggest signs of me having gender dysphoria is how I hated to have short hair.
Yeah, I had that.
I realized
So-
later that I was more comfortable in long hair as well.
It was also like when I was developing, growing hair in other places, that was like very uncomfortable and I didn't really understand why. Just on my chest.
But of course now you do realize that you had dysphoria all along, but it wasn't clear back then to you.
Well, yeah, now it's like a horrifying thought, but back then it was simply confusing and slightly uncomfortable. I didn't know it was dysphoria.
I know for a lot of me, it was a lot of like social disconnections. I lived with two brothers and like, they definitely behaved a lot differently than me. So that was one thing I noticed that I couldn't really pinpoint back then. Like they're more competitive and like more rough and more willing to get down and dirty. And I was just never like that.
Yeah, this fits into the other thing that people might be referring to is the old trans stereotype or description where you behave like a girl trapped in a male body. So even though you are grown up as male and designed male at birth, you behave more like a stereotypical female. And it's something that applies to you.
Yeah, a little bit, for sure. Like, especially when I was just like comparing myself to my brothers, because they always try to make everything a competition. And, you know, sometimes I just didn't really want that, you know. I just wanted to have like a family that like cared about me.
I think there are many people who never transition or don't really fit into those male expectations anyway. So it's hard to differentiate if people have some like trans condition, some like intersex brain, or is it just that it's just normal variation that some people are more feminine as males? But if you are more feminine, you could actually benefit from transitioning though, because you can have gender roles that are more fitting for you.
Yes, transitioning definitely makes life more validating. If you didn't know you wanted to be treated as a woman, but you wanted to be treated as a woman.
Yeah, that's another source of dysphoria that people might not be aware of. Like being uncomfortable with your place, your gender role in society.
I think a lot of males are not too happy about it, but they still keep on trying to make it as males anyway. They might want a family. It might be like expectations, but then of course there are some people who cannot live up to those expectations, and they might actually want to be masculine but can't. Or some people don't even want it in the first place.
I think that's where I fall. I didn't even want it in the first place. I never really identified with the whole like trapped in a male body.
Yeah,
It's just
me
not what
neither. I never truly felt like a woman, but when I just look back to how I acted, I definitely didn't act like a man. That's for sure.
Yeah, putting it like that, I definitely didn't. But I was still pretty masculine.
In my case, it's actually a mixed bag. In some ways, I'm very masculine in a non-traditional sense, like into mathematics, physics, stuff like that. That are not those like stereotypical dumb masculinity. I was not really much of a fighter. I pretty much never like got into physical fights with other people. Except I was like getting into judo actually. It's actually like that, but I will never want to like physically find someone and get punched or find someone else. Like if it is some sport it's fine, but not this altercation where you're like harming someone else and risking jail time. This was very unappealing to me.
Yeah. Honestly, when I first heard this podcasting idea, I had like a whole different spin about it, and I was like, yes, transmaxing is to help the people who are like trans but like in denial of it, where they don't think they are trans, and like they will fight against that idea, and like I do think that we're here to like help them transition at an earlier time and like get past these clouds of doubt they have with transitioning.
I think most, if not probably all, transmaxxers identify with being trans anyway. Like this
Yeah.
whole idea that we're like in denial that we're trans is just missing the point. We are trans. We're just going about everything like a little bit differently.
Yeah, obviously. And like if you look at our community and the members here, we see clear differences between the typical male population. For example, the preference for playing as a female character is very strong here, for example. Even in my case, actually in the past I didn't care too much about it, but increasingly I really don't like playing as a male character in video games. So I think people here in general like being feminine, at least in some ways. Like in my case it's just like in games. But of course many people here are transitioning as well, taking hormones and all that.
Yeah, even when it comes to like the atmosphere of like the chatter, I would say it is a more feminine environment, and those who like display too masculine of a vibe usually just kind of weird out the other trans women here, and usually they don't last long unless they like smarten up a little, you know?
Or if they're just chasers, they just do their thing.
I
Chasers tend to be kind of feminine sometimes, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think being in denial about dysphoria or AGP is more common among chasers, to be honest, than people who identify as transmaxxers.
Yeah. Honestly, the point here is to transition. So I don't understand the whole us being in denial of being trans.
They are obviously referring to something else, such as loving yourself as a female, being turned on when you see yourself as a female, especially in more sexy situation, which is also common amongst these females too. We are also not denying that most people here did have gender dysphoria as males. That does not, however, imply that reduction of gender dysphoria was the only reason why a transvaxxer benefited from transitioning. There are so many other potential benefits you can get from medical transition.
Oh yeah, I remember talking to someone about this for sure. Like, they talked about how, like, a big thing when it comes to dysphoria, in my opinion, is it can kind of be conflated with you trying hard to do something and, like, your efforts not being, like, seen, you know? When you try to pass as a woman, it feels worse to be called a man than it is if, you know, you're coping as a man still, for example. So it's hard to conflate that and just be like, that's straight up gender dysphoria when it's like, it's kind of you just like failing at something and you feel bad about it, you know?
It's embarrassing.
Yeah, and obviously we live in societies where failing to pass as a female will come with various problems, to say the least.
But yeah, due to the vagueness of how gender dysphoria is described, it's very easy to just like lump in something and be like, see, that was the gender dysphoria, and you know, it wasn't even that big of a deal in your life, you know?
Yeah, and this is a problem as well, because it's very easy in retrospect to diagnose someone with something nebulous as gender dysphoria. But for this to be scientific, to actually say anything meaningful, you have to say it in advance before someone decides to transition or not. And as we have seen in the previous podcast, we actually saw that there wasn't really a clear benefit from fitting into the stricter true trans narrative when it comes to like transition outcomes.
Yeah, the opinion I've even like came to before visiting transmaxxing in general is that, like, you know, everyone comes to terms with transitioning differently, and we should all be trying to do our best and live our best lives as a result of transitioning.
Yeah, and maybe not try to push all these ideologies and pseudoscience so hard. Like, people really need to do a better job of taking a more scientific approach to those things. It's better long term, instead of all this wishful thinking and wanting to believe certain things. Like, sure, it's making you more happy to believe in whatever that makes you feel good, but like longer term for the trans community in general, we really have to value science and reality. Some people want to claim that if a transmaxxer doesn't get incompatible with the changes, that this will mean that they had a trans condition all along, when in reality a lot of people do not really have much of a preference for one sex over the other. They can adapt living as either sex or gender.
I'm not convinced that I've seen someone, a transmaxxer, entirely without dysphoria yet, but like, I think it could happen. I think that's okay.
Yeah, it's the earlier problem with dysphoria being the spectrum, so there are going to be those people with just very mild dysphoria. But of course, people here in general is going to skew towards people who are incompatible as males, obviously, because also the people more likely to take HRT and actually transition. But if you have like milder cases, milder neurological conditions that push you towards transitioning, you will be less likely to take this step. Okay, this marks the end of episode 28 of the Transmaxxing podcast. I hope that you will have a nice day forward, and maybe comment below if you have anything more to say.